Hello, I'm Sula, host of Sula's Big Adventures. In the past, you may have heard me mention famous astronomer William Herschel. But did you know that William Herschel was an accomplished composer, composing 24 symphonies and 12 concertos, and that he could play the organ and the oboe? I'm sure much better than I can. And his sister Caroline Herschel was also a famous astronomer. In this episode, I'm going to tell you all about the amazing Herschels. William and Caroline Herschel were both born in Hanover, Germany. William in 1738 and Caroline in 1750. When Hanover was occupied by France, William fled to England when he was just 19 years old, and there he studied music, landing a position at a posh chapel in Bath. His sister Caroline stayed behind in Hanover, and there she contracted typhus when she was only 10 years old. She never exceeded 4 foot 3 inches in height, but what she lacked in stature, she more than made up for in her accomplishments. William brought his sister Caroline to Bath in 1772, and there she trained to become a singer. William also tutored Caroline in mathematics. While studying music theory, William read Robert Smith's Harmonics, and he also read Robert Smith's book, Complete System of Optics, and that's how William learned how to make a telescope. Combining perspicacity with boundless energy, William was not content to just observe the solar system like most of the astronomers of his day. He was determined to study distant celestial bodies, but he realized he would need a telescope with large mirrors to collect enough light, larger, in fact, than opticians at the time could supply at a reasonable cost. He was soon forced to grind his own mirrors, and they were ground from metal discs of copper, tin, and antimony in proportions. And in 1781, he prepared to cast molten metal into discs in the basement of his own home. But the first mirror cracked on cooling, and on the second attempt, the metal ran out onto the flagstones, which Caroline said got on her smock. William's later attempts, though, were successful, and he produced ever larger mirrors of superb quality. And in fact, his telescopes were even better than those found at the Greenwich Observatory. He also made his own eyepieces, the strongest with a magnifying power of 6,450 times. I'd like to borrow that eyepiece. At Bath, he was helped in his researches by his sister Caroline, who was his faithful assistant throughout his life. William, you work so hard. Let me give you some tea. Here, I'll leave the pot here for you while you work. Thank you, Caroline. Caroline, I do believe the object I described last night was a planet. I'm planning to call it Georgium Sidereus, George's star after King George III. News of this extraordinary household began to spread in scientific circles, and William made 2 preliminary telescopic surveys of the sky, and on the third and most complete survey of the night sky in 1781, he came upon an object that he knew was no ordinary star. It proved to be the planet Uranus, the first planet to be discovered since prehistoric times, and the first one with the telescope. William became famous almost overnight. The Royal Society of London awarded William the Copley Medal for the discovery of Uranus and elected him a fellow member. William also scored in 1782 an annual pension of £200 from George III, and he was appointed astronomer to George III. This allowed him to give up music entirely, and Caroline as well, and devote himself exclusively to astronomy. Although he was 43 years old when he became a professional astronomer, William worked night after night scanning the heavens. A fundamental problem for which Herschel's big telescopes were uniquely suited concerned the nature of nebulae, which appear as luminous patches in the sky. And some astronomers at that time thought they were nothing more than clusters of innumerable stars, the light of which blended into a kind of milky appearance. Other astronomers held that the nebulae were composed of a luminous fluid. When William's interest in nebulae developed in the winter of 1781, he quickly found that his most powerful telescopes could resolve into stars several nebulae that appeared milky to less well-equipped observers. He was convinced that other nebulae would eventually be resolved into individual stars with more powerful instruments. And this encouraged him to argue in 1784 that all nebulae were formed of stars and that there was no need to postulate the existence of some kind of mysterious luminous fluid to explain it. In 1787, the Herschels moved to Old Windsor, and the following year to Slough, where William spent the rest of his life. Night after night, whenever the moon and the weather permitted, he observed the sky in the company of his sister Caroline, who recorded his observations. William, could you repeat the right ascension of that last star? I don't see it in Flamsteed's catalog. You found another nebula? Excellent. Was that 8 hours, 50 seconds right ascension? On overcast nights, William would post a watchman to summon him if the clouds should break. And I would like to have such a watchman as well. In the daytime, Caroline would summarize the results of their work while William directed the construction on his telescopes. Time to record the observations from last night. Oh, John Flamsteed's catalog, organized in such a desultory manner. So difficult to cross-reference these stars. Oh, and so many omissions. Good heavens. His largest instrument was too cumbersome to be used regularly, and it had a mirror made of speculum metal with a diameter of 122 centimeters, or 48 inches, and a focal length of 12 meters, or 40 feet. It was completed in 1789, and it became one of the technical wonders of the 18th century. William Herschel's achievements were made possible by his total dedication and the dedicated support of his sister Caroline. Caroline took notes of William's observations and research. She kept house, and she ground and polished mirrors. William, I'm nearly finished polishing this mirror. This mirror is enormous. It's your biggest yet, isn't it, William? It's going to be spectacular. You're going to see so many nebulae with this mirror. She also executed laborious calculations connected with his observations, and she also swept the heavens herself with a small Newtonian reflector, and she made her own astronomical discoveries. Caroline repeatedly made it clear that she wished to earn an income and be independent, and in 1787, the king gave her an annual pension of £50 in her capacity as William's assistant, and she became the world's first professional woman astronomer. Yes, William? William, careful on that ladder, dear. You found something that you don't think is a star? Well, what do you think it is, William? In the summer of 1783, William finished building a comet-searching telescope for Caroline, and she began to use it immediately. On February 26, 1783, with her own telescope, she made her first discovery. she had found a nebula that was not included in the Messier catalog. And that same night, she independently discovered Messier 110, also known as NGC 205. That's the second companion of the Great Andromeda Galaxy, M31. And in all, Caroline detected 3 nebulae in 1783. William then began to search himself for nebulae, sensing that there were many discoveries out there to be made. Caroline was then relegated to a ladder on William's 20-foot reflector, attempting impossible measurements of double stars. Caroline, it's very inefficient to continuously go up this ladder to access my eyepiece and then come back down to record my observations. There must be a more efficient way. William quickly realized that this method of searching for nebulae was inefficient, and he required someone to keep records for him and also keep his eyes dark adapted. So naturally, he turned to Caroline. Caroline, I believe I've spotted another nebula. Can you please take down the coordinates for me and cross-reference it with Flamsteed's catalog with the nearest star? It's at 5 hours, 30 minutes, and 1 second. On August the 28th, 1782, William's sister Caroline initiated her first record book. She inscribed the first 3 opening pages. This is what I call the bills and records of my comments, and also comments and letters and books of observations. This, along with 2 subsequent books, currently belong to the Herschel Trove at the Royal Astronomical Society in London. Beginning in October 1783, the Herschels used a 20-foot reflecting telescope to search for nebulae. Initially, when William attempted to both observe and record objects, and when he realized the inefficiency of this, he asked Caroline to sit by a window inside, and William would shout his observations to her, and then she would record them. Caroline, it's my biggest telescope ever. I think we're going to make great discoveries with it, but it requires going up this 20-foot ladder, so be careful when you come up here. This was no simple clerical task, though, because Caroline would have to use John Flamsteed's catalog to identify the star William used as a reference point for the nebulae. And because Flamsteed's catalog was organized by constellations, it was less useful to the Herschels. So Caroline created her own catalog organized by the North Polar distance. The following morning, Caroline would go over her notes and write up formal observations, which she called minding the heavens. In 1786, she became the first woman to discover a comet, periodic comet that was later named 35P Herschel-Rigollet. And over the next 11 years, Caroline spotted 7 other comets. In 1797, William's observations had shown that there were a great many discrepancies in the star catalog published by John Flamsteed, which was difficult to use because it had been published in 2 volumes. And there was a catalog proper and a volume of original observations. And also, Flamsteed's catalog contained many errors. William realized that he needed a proper cross-index to properly explore these differences, but he was reluctant to devote time to that at the expense of his time at the eyepiece in making interesting astronomical observations. So he recommended to Caroline that she undertake this arduous task, which ultimately took 20 months. In 1798, the resulting catalog of stars taken from Mr. Flamsteed's observations, contained in the 2nd volume of Historia, was presented to the Royal Society by Caroline, along with an index of John Flamsteed's observations, and together with a catalog of 560 stars that he had omitted from the British catalog, and errata and it was published by the Royal Society in 1798. On November the 13th, 1790, William Herschel observed a remarkable nebula, which he was forced to interpret as a central star surrounded by luminosity. And this discovery contradicted his earlier views that many nebulae that he was unable to resolve into separate stars were island universes, or what we call galaxies. William was able to theorize in this way using his wealth of observations from 20 years of systematic sweeps for nebulae from 1783 to 1802, which also resulted in 3 catalogs listing 2,500 nebulae and star clusters that he substituted for the 100 or so fuzzy patches previously known. He also cataloged 848 double stars and measurements of the comparative brightness of the stars. He observed that double stars did not occur by chance, but were a result of the stars actually revolving about each other. William Herschel married a widow, Mary Pitt, in 1788, and they had one son, John Herschel, in 1792. William's marriage likely led to Caroline becoming more independent of her brother and more of a figure in her own right. Caroline made many discoveries independently of William, and she continued to work solo on many of the astronomical projects which contributed to the rise of her own fame. In 1802, the Royal Society published Caroline's Catalogue in its Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society under William's name, and this listed around 500 new nebulae and star clusters to the already known 2,000. Toward the end of Caroline's life, she arranged 2,500 nebulae and star clusters into zones of similar polar distances so that her nephew and William's son, John Herschel, could re-examine them systematically. John Herschel eventually published a catalog of his astronomical observations in 1864 as the General Catalogue of Nebulae and Clusters, a compilation of his own work and that of his fathers and his aunts. The Catalogue of Nebulae. A further complementary volume was published posthumously as the General Catalogue of 10,300 multiple and double stars, and these observations of William, Caroline, and John Herschel eventually became the new General Catalogue, or NGC, used by astronomers today, and published in the 1880s by John Louis Emile Dreyer. John Herschel made important contributions to photography, and he even coined the term photography in 1839. And John Herschel also named 7 of the moons around Saturn and 4 around Uranus, which was discovered by his father. He also discovered 4 galaxies that are in the NGC catalog, among many other things. William Herschel is considered the founder of sidereal astronomy for the systematic observation of the stars and nebulae beyond the solar system. His 70 published papers included not only studies of the motion of the solar system through space, but also the announcement in the 1800s of the discovery of the infrared rays. He was knighted in 1816, and he died in Slough, England in 1822. After William's death in 1822, his sister Caroline was obviously grief-stricken, and she moved back to Hanover, Germany. She continued her astronomical studies, though, to verify and confirm William's findings, and she produced a catalog of nebulae in Hanover. She spent the most of her time working on the catalog. In 1828, when she was 77 years old, the Royal Astronomical Society presented her with their gold medal for this work, for her recent reduction of the 2,500 nebulae discovered by her illustrious brother, and they said this may be considered as the completion of a series of exertions probably unparalleled, either in magnitude or importance in the annals of astronomical labor. No woman would be awarded that again until Vera Rubin in 1996. Also upon William's death, his son John Herschel took over observing at Slough, and Caroline had given her nephew John his first introduction into astronomy when she showed him the constellations in Flamsteed's atlas. Caroline added her final entry to her observing book on January 31st, 1824, about the Great Comet of 1823. Throughout the twilight of her life, Caroline maintained physically active and healthy, and she regularly socialized with other scientific luminaries. She spent her last years writing her memoirs and lamenting her body's limitations, which we all do, which kept her from making any more original discoveries. The Royal Astronomical Society elected Caroline Herschel an honorary member in 1835, along with Mary Somerville. They were the first women members. Caroline Herschel died peacefully in Hanover on January the 9th, 1848. She's buried in Hanover at the cemetery of the Gartengemeinde, next to her parents and with a lock of William's hair. Her tombstone is inscribed, "The eyes of her who is glorified here below turn to the starry heavens." With her brother, Caroline discovered over 2,400 astronomical objects over 20 years. The crater C. Herschel on the Moon is named after Caroline Herschel. An Adrian Rich 1968 poem, Planetarium, celebrates Caroline Herschel's life and scientific achievements. Also, Judy Chicago's artwork in 1969, The Dinner Party, which celebrates historical women who've made extraordinary contributions, features a place at the table for Caroline Herschel. The open clusters NGC 2360, Caroline's cluster, in Canis Major, and NGC 7789, called Caroline's Rose in Cassiopeia, are named in Caroline Herschel's honor. In 2022, the Herschel Museum of Astronomy in Bath acquired a handwritten draft of Caroline Herschel's memoirs, which will be put on display in 2023. And that's the story of the amazing Herschels. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's it for now. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, go outside and enjoy the night sky.